today. Voting access, historical and current perspectives. Well, actually, I want to say actually the discussion is more than just about voting access. It's also about no doubt, the electoral campaign season that we're in, one of the most consequential, most important ones in very much in several generations, I would probably say. So we thought that it very much would be proper to speak about this election and the role of voter access as part of this series of structural racism for several reasons. One is the issue of the ability to vote has been a contentious issue, or was a contentious issue for over 250 years in our society in the United States, when millions of African Americans, enslaved people, were denied the right to vote because they were slaves. And then even when after the Civil War, with the enactment of the 15th Amendment and several other passages of legislation that supposedly that did provide the opportunity or the right to vote, we know that still large segments of the African American community, particularly in the South, were denied access because of Southern Black laws, Black codes, poll taxes, literary tests, and so forth, denied access for African Americans to be able to vote, and which has consequences for political representation. So that there is historically issues of structural racism, even in the process of electoral politics and the right of representation of Black people and people they choose to represent them. And also, it's important that we talk about the election because, as Islamic Relief and many of you of our partners who are head of social services organizations, anti-poverty organizations, community-based organizations, elections have consequences. Whether we're talking from the presidential election, or we're talking down ballot, your senators, your representatives, or for those in states who maybe have gubernatorial races this year, even your state elected officials. This election has consequences. I think it's fair to say that, particularly for those who decide for whatever reason who didn't vote, I'm not saying who you voted for, last election and for the presidential national election, there has definitely been consequences over these past 3.5 years. So in that sense, no doubt our elected officials, whether in Congress or state assemblies, pass laws. The president, governors sign them, enact them, or veto them into law that have consequences, that have impact on many of the programs that we work or utilize in our work to help poor, hungry, the homeless, people striving to get a hand up in life, to secure greater opportunity for economic empowerment, educational attainment, and so forth. So it's very much in line that we have this discussion about this election, which is, man, we're under 2 weeks away. 13 days, November 3rd, Tuesday. So we wanted to take this opportunity to bring in a few folks that are well-versed for community activists, but also who are very active in electoral campaigning, experts or very knowledgeable on electoral and campaign activities, particularly within the Muslim community, particularly also within the African American Muslim community, since this webinar series has a focus on the African American Muslim community in particular, because there's structural racism, anti-Black racism, but quite often many of those policies or those histories of structural racism also impact other brown communities. So I wanted to actually take this moment to introduce my two good friends who are joining us, people that are no stranger to Islamic Relief, and in many ways it is Islamic Relief's privilege to be able to work with them in their respective organizations. First, I want to start off introduce, just to give a short bio, our good sister, Ndidi Akakpu. Ndidi is joining us from Chicago. Ndidi is currently she is a senior development manager for Iman Chicago, Inner City Muslim Action Network. And Islamic Relief has the privilege of working with Iman and providing support for their wonderful health clinic program that they have there on Southside Chicago. But also, Ndidi has served as the past or present emeritus of the Chicagoland Shore Council. She's an active member of the American Coalition for Good Government, which is a long-established civic engagement organization founded within the greater War for Muhammad community to increase political participation and engagement with elected and government officials. And then she's also currently active in a new initiative that has emerged during this particular campaign cycle, right now known as BAM, Black American Muslim Voter Initiative, which is taking the lead in engaging African American Muslims with the Biden campaign in specific. And also the next, our good brother, friend of mine also, based out of Chicago, based out of Detroit, brother Mark Crane. Mark is a digital strategist and a community organizer with local and national experience. Currently, he is the lead of Dream of Detroit, an initiative to build a thriving, healthy community around the Muslim Center of Detroit, and also organizing the Muslim American community in the Metro Detroit region around racial and economic justice issues. And Dream of Detroit also, Islamic Leaf has the privilege of working with and being a grantor to some of their wonderful, important programs. And I think Dream of Detroit, if you have been to Detroit, make sure you make a stop by Dream of Detroit and the Muslim Center. They've refurbished now over 10 homes in the community, worked with the city to get lights on the streets, cleaned up the community, planted trees. It's a wonderful initiative. But also at a national level, Mark is the chief of member experience for MoveOn.org, where he's a lead on campaigns on expanding access to healthcare, preventing the expansion of U.S. wars abroad, and taking down Confederate monuments. And also, if I'm correct, Mark has also himself spent time in Chicago and also worked with Iman Chicago as a community organizer, a digital organizer for them back in the day before returning back to Detroit. So we're glad to have both of you on. Assalamu alaikum, and Didi. Brother Mark, it's good to see you. It's always great to have you on. Just want to give you an opportunity to say salams and welcome to everyone. And Didi.
Alaikum salam. Welcome.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. It's great to be here.
Okay. Well, I think actually it's important for me to say on behalf of Islamic Relief that we are talking about voting, we are talking about elections, we are talking about campaigns on this webinar. But in particular, Islamic Relief USA, we are a 501c3 organization. That means we are nonpartisan and we do not endorse candidates. We do take our role as a community-based organization to promote civic engagement, political participation, and voting, helping people to, encouraging people to take their full, rights of as being a citizen. And if you want to go on, you can go to IRUSA.org/go vote, or just type in IRUSA, our short abbreviation for Islamic Relief USA, and IRUSA Go Vote. We have a whole page dedicated to your vote, your voice, your vote campaign. Again, us promoting and encouraging our supporters at Islamic Relief to vote in this election based upon your humanitarian values. Again, we don't tell you who to vote for, but we do help raise important issues around poverty, hunger, homelessness that we believe you should consider when you're doing your evaluation of the various candidates, whether it's at the federal level, at the presidential level, congressional level, or even at the city level. How as Muslim Americans, as humanitarian advocates, should that help us inform our decisions on who we elect. And why it's important that we promote that is because ultimately who you vote for in your city, your state, Islamic Relief is going to end up engaging and lobbying here in Washington, D.C. on those core principles of securing greater food security programs, greater housing programs, and so forth, and greater amounts of anti-poverty programs that you call upon us as an advocacy organization to represent Muslim American values, humanitarian values on Capitol Hill to congressional members and also whoever's in the White House and the relevant Department of Agriculture, Health and Human Services, and so forth. So ultimately what you do, the consequences of your vote determines very much the work of myself and my associates in Islamic Relief's Government Affairs Office in our advocacy and lobbying on humanitarian programs and projects and legislation in DC. So again, another good reason why we want you to vote. Can't tell you who to vote for, but we're going to leave it to our good brother, sister Ndidi and brother Mark. We're giving them free reign to speak from their own center, from their position in their communities as a form of public education, but particularly again, focus on the African-American Muslim experience as a distinct, a long historic, important component of the Muslim American experience, which quite often within larger, at least from my experience over the past 20 years, being involved in electoral politics, at least from the Muslim perspective, is not always highly represented, or doesn't get the front page, or is not always the focus of many campaigns when they engage in the Muslim American community. Sometimes the concerns, the social interests, the policy parties of the African American Muslim experience or community quite often is not the headliner of when we're engaging politicians or campaign people running for office. So we would definitely want to raise those points up in this discussion. So I do want to start off with our first question. Actually, we'll start off with Brother Mark. And we'll give Ndidi the opportunity to answer on it. Is, from your perspective, as being members of the African American Muslim community or a particular network, Chicago, Detroit, regionally, or so forth, that have particular needs. And so, what are the socially, the political, or the economic, what's at stake with this election? What's at stake for your community with this election? Or another way to put it is, what are the social core concerns of your communities or your network? And what would be an example or two, maybe, of some type of policy or legislative change that you would like to see, in whether it's at the federal level with Congress and whoever becomes president? We'll start with Brother Mark.
Okay, thank you again for having me today. I'm very grateful to talk with y'all today. Alhamdulillah, we got the chance a few months ago to speak with Islamic Relief and some other partners around housing, which is a court issue for DREAM, which I'll actually talk about a little bit in a bit, but happy to be a part of this conversation as well. So, what's at stake is really a good way to frame this question, because what's at stake really undergirds a lot of the conversation around whether and how to vote. Who do you know who's going to be impacted by the outcome of a particular election? Which of your family members or friends might go hungrier because they're going to lose the SNAP benefits, or what we call food stamps, right? If this particular administration is able to achieve that goal. Which of your extended relatives or coworkers is at risk of being violently separated from their family in a surprise deportation, of having their children come home to an empty house, literally, because they were taken away at work in the middle of the day, and sometimes we forget that Black people in particular are disproportionately deported, right? Black folks make up 7% of non-citizens in the US and make up something like 20% of those facing deportation on criminal grounds. So you see, anti-Blackness, rear its head even in that context, right? But which one of your cousins might lose their homes if their property tax assessments aren't fixed because, the status quo is continued under their next, mayoral administration or what have you? And so these are the questions that you have to ask yourself if you're considering, not voting, because we all do have something at stake. And, some folks have done a really good job at convincing us that the government has nothing to offer us, that it has neither the responsibility nor the ability to help change conditions. And we can't let ourselves fall for that. So Muslims, we're incredibly diverse in our political perspectives. We know this, right? In fact, a lot of people might call themselves, socially conservative but fiscally liberal. Which means they, don't easily align with either major party. Prior to this current sort of more open retrenchment into white supremacy by the GOP, the Muslim vote would break down quite clearly along sort of ethnic and particularly class lines. But you also have, I think, in the Black Muslim community, there is a strain of a sort of conservatism that makes people sometimes fall into what we might call like personal piety politics, right? Where we start to focus on the personal habits of people who are facing poverty rather than the problems embedded in the systems that we've built as a society that are perpetuating that, right? We do this too as religious folks. And so we have to, I think, check that impulse, not to, of course, excuse anyone from self-accountability, but I think when we talk about policy, we're talking about structures and systems. We're not talking about the foregone habits of one particular person. And so the outcome of that then, right, is that as Muslims, we oftentimes we do a great job of giving in charity, but we don't concern ourselves enough with changing the policies that create and prolong poverty, right? And so, we've tried to train and get people to see organizing actually as a form of service, right? Because organizing is how you empower people to change the policies that are impacting their lives, and that should be, something that we engage in out of a sense of obligation. So, in our work here with Dream of Detroit, we work in a 92% Black neighborhood. It's anchored physically by our masjid, as you mentioned, the Muslim Center. Everybody is welcome to come visit us at the Muslim Center. The masjid, of course, comes out of Imam Murthy Muhammad's community historically. The Dream organizes Muslims from throughout the Metro Detroit area. So, again, recognizing the diversity of political thought and maturation and so forth in our community. We often go back to sort of the universal words of the Prophet ﷺ when we talk about how Muslims should think about prioritizing policies. And so, one hadith that we often reference in our work is where Prophet ﷺ says, peace be upon him, says, there's no right for the son of Adam except in these things: a house in which he lives, a garment to cover his nakedness, and a piece of bread and water. And so for us, that's a very clear and plain articulation that housing is a human right. And in fact, this country is always at a housing shortage, and particularly affordable housing. When we talk about the choice points before us today, and I'm starting to wrap up, we have on the one hand, we have an opportunity, hopefully, to pursue policies that'll create more first-time home buyers, particularly in Black communities and other communities of color. We have, on the other hand, we have, a commitment to sort of double down on the current system, that is making banks flush with cash, but still causing housing shortage in cities like Detroit. And so, the chief economist at Realtor.com, she said, Danielle Hill, she said, when voters make a decision in November, the choices are largely preserving the status quo in the housing market versus expanding opportunities for minorities, low income, and lower middle class households. We often think about, the connection housing to community development. There's a person who, his name is Aaron Siebert, he's the social investment officer at the Kresge Foundation, which is based here in Detroit. And when he gave his assessment of the current administration's opportunity zones, he said that perhaps 95% of these funds are doing no good for the people that we care about, right? And this is a foundation with a focus on urban communities. And then of course, there's the ever-present issue of jobs. And the question we ask ourselves is, in a state like Michigan, did we see an infrastructure bill in the last 4 years? We didn't. I think we saw 3 failed infrastructure weeks, but never saw legislation. Have we seen a return of automotive jobs in our communities? No, we haven't. But in fact, we've seen 2 major rounds of layoffs at Ford for both blue collar and white collar workers. And so, but then we see the billboard go up on the freeway that says, proud to employ 40,000 people in our hometown. So the marketing just consumes. My point being, housing is one that we focus on because we think, again, for the Muslim community, it should be undebatable as a priority issue. And then, of course, again, in a city like Detroit, jobs are also. So I'll close.
Thank you, Brother Mark. Appreciate it. Jobs, housing, food security. And these are great. These are, long-term systemic issues. As we think about also, no doubt we're all thinking about also very much important for this election cycle and what people are voting upon is definitely also COVID, health issues, the racial injustice and how that also leads not only, but definitely criminal justice reform and also economic security, which is still tied to employment. So it's also important to know that, a lot of our organizations, we are looking at responding to some of these immediate needs, but also having perspective, the long-term concerns around consistently all these employment, job opportunities, housing and food. And Brother Mark, I want to just also raise that point. You raised a good point before we let Sister Ndidi take that question also is how you said that many people, not just Muslims, but you mentioned Muslims, about how they pay, the issue of how they pay taxes compared to zakat, right? And this has been a main issue we've been driving at Islamic Relief about the importance that quite often so many Muslim Americans probably end up paying more in taxes than they ever do in zakat, right? but they hold organizations like Islamic Relief more accountable. They call us, they tell us where they want their donations to go to. If they don't like how we're managing their money or providing the programs that they want to support, they take their money to another humanitarian organization, and that's fine. But how many times do people ever think that their taxes that they pay at the federal level is a mandatory secular zakat, and that they need to call their member of Congress to tell them how they want that money to be spent, right? On humanitarian programs, anti-poverty programs, instead of some $15 million jet plane or $500 toilet seat in the Pentagon or whatever it is. And it's funny how people need to take perspective on how
No, that's absolutely right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had a friend one time, he asked a scholar, he said, he didn't want to pay us, he was worried about paying his taxes because of, that money being used to fund the war machine, really. And the scholar said to him, well, he said you have to pay your taxes, but pay it with the intention that your taxes aren't going toward the Department of Defense. But you're right. I mean, we need to clarify our intention and, have refer to accountability, call these people repeatedly every day. And I can tell you from an advocacy perspective, calls to Congress work, period. More than emails, more than petitions, calls to Congress get counted, get noted, get reported. So it's really, I'm glad you mentioned that.
And as a former congressional staff, I endorse what Mark just said. Yes, call is most important. Sister Ndidi, again, from your perspective, from the work that you're doing in the community you're embedded in, what's at stake with this election? What are some of the core social or policy concerns of the community that you're seeing that are historically, long-term trajectory issues?
Yeah, just really quickly, Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Just really quickly on the topic of Muslims and philanthropy, I attended a training with the Center of Muslim Philanthropy, and they do like a survey, they do like a lot of research as well on Muslim giving. And it was really interesting because out of all of the religious American groups, Muslim Americans actually, we give the least. In terms of like, when you look at how Christians and tithing and the Jewish communities. So insofar as we always say, oh, the Muslim community has money on a whole, in aggregate, okay. As much as we say that, we're not driving the car on the giving piece. So I think that was a really good point in terms of looking into how our taxes are reinvested in the communities and work that we want. So thank you for bringing that up, Brother Jihad. In terms of what is at stake, what are our communities concerned about? I just want to be clear, I'm not speaking on behalf of any particular entity. I've been consulting for 10 years. I do work for Inner City Muslim Action Network as a senior development manager. I'm not specifically representing any particular entity, but what I will say is that 2020 has been a case study in the disparities, the needs, and the focuses of the Black community, the Black Muslim community, the Muslim community. And I want to make clear the fact that the Muslim community is not monolithic, and the Muslim community, no one has full ownership on the Muslim community. So a lot of times we say Muslim community and issues that are affecting Muslim, a lot of it tends to get it's heavy on the, Asian American side, right? And then when we have Black issues or issues that affect Black people or Black people issues, even if they affect Black Muslims. So it's important that we continue to be vigilant with the accountability on that perspective. Any issue that's affecting Black Muslims is affecting Muslims and the Muslim community at large. And so we always need to remember that. But 2020, and hold on, not only do the issues that affect Black Muslims affect the Muslim community at large, but any issues that are going to affect Black people eventually will circle out to the whole Muslim community as well. And I think Brother Ali, our brother out in Minneapolis, excellent, phenomenal human being and artist and rapper, was saying that everyone keeps trying to get their liberation, but until Black people get their liberation, literally the foundation of everyone's liberation is relying upon that of Black people, because you have to look at those who have been most degraded by society. and until the most trespassed upon, for lack of a better term, have liberation, no one really has liberation. Just like Dr. King said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere, right? Okay, so with that preface, 2020 has been a complete case study in what we need to be focusing on. From a grassroots nonprofit perspective, I was on the ground, as many people were, just experiencing everything from the grave disparities in healthcare, which made Black people and Black Muslims more susceptible to COVID, right? And it's been an aggravation of all of these systemic racial and social disparities. They've just been like laid out and exacerbated and augmented. So we know that, in Chicago, at least, we had 70% COVID rates in the Black community. 70% of people with COVID were African American, and that impacted the Muslim community. There have been Muslims who have passed away from COVID. For everyone who has passed and everyone who's experiencing that. This has grossly, laid bare disparities in access to healthcare. So that's a big portion, big point is quality healthcare. Current administration is trying to repeal, if you want to call it Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act. So, access to quality healthcare and insurance, people we're having to go to clinics. Clinics are overrun. The emergency rooms are overrun. We've had to do pop-up testing, COVID testing sites to help deal with the increased volume of cases. People had to, various health centers had to switch to telehealth. So there's been large disparities. There's access to healthy foods, right? So a lot of it is going to be connected to socioeconomic barriers and policies that create economic opportunities in low-income Black and Brown and minority communities, right? So we know about this concept of health deserts in areas food deserts in areas that don't have access to quality foods. In those neighborhoods, you find high statistics of obesity, diabetes, high blood pressure, and all of these things which make you more susceptible to COVID. So these are things that have been very clear. These are areas that we are really focused on for 2020. And quite frankly, because there have been long-term health effects of the virus, continued access to health insurance and things like that. Another part, the other pandemic that we've been experiencing is the pandemic of the killings and death, is Black death, the pandemic of Black death, for lack of a better term. The assaults on Black bodies and the sanctity of Black lives. These are, 2020 has shown the ugliness that's always been apparent, that's been apparent for too long in this country. But it has exacerbated the need for police accountability, as well as criminal justice reform. There is a heavy Black African-American Muslim population that is also incarcerated. We're looking for criminal justice reform and programs that support re-entry, so that when people are returning citizens, that they are able to adequately and reintegrate into society. So these are just a list of things that 2020 has showed us. But just for a couple of points, police accountability and safety, the right to jog in a neighborhood, or to do your job, or to be at home, or to play video games with your child and not have someone bust in your home and kill you and then get off for doing that. Criminal justice reform as a whole, economic opportunities that will help mitigate the socioeconomic disparities that have been plaguing our communities, and causing barriers to fair housing and access to quality housing, which is a human right. Freedom from predatory lending and policies that help support predatory financial practices that weigh heavily against Black and Brown communities. And again, access to healthcare, public and private.
Thank you, Sister Ndidi. And just listening to you and Mark, it makes me think about how, it can be considered a radical idea in ways that what Muslim Americans experience, and particularly the African American Muslim experience, concerns are very much the concerns of all Americans. And I say that because at an alarming rate, seeing certain political, at least at the national level, where there's been engagement with Muslim Americans from campaigns, and I would say particularly with the Biden campaign, I haven't heard a lot of engagement, just observing from, say, the Trump campaign, but even then, quite often the messaging about what issues that are led in his discussion with Muslim Americans around important issues, such as the Muslim ban or Islamophobia. So sometimes trying to understand what that means or what that is, or a lot of international issues. And no doubt the Muslim American community in its diversity, Black, South Asian, Arab, we're concerned about these issues. But sometimes existential threats that are happening on the ground to communities in the Muslim American community around COVID, it takes a while for them to get to those issues as if somehow those aren't issues impacting our community. But when you hear the engagement by candidates with other communities, other racial, other ethnic communities, those are front and center. Somehow as the Muslim American community, we're not subjected to Maslow's hierarchy of needs with health, security, and protection during this pandemic and racial injustice. But so it's refreshing to hear from ourselves saying that our needs are in many ways no different than other Americans, but that can be important. That's not always even expressed in our Muslim community. I know there's probably ideas, questions are starting to germinate. If you do have questions, we're going to have a Q&A. There is a Q&A function here on Zoom. If you're observing at the bottom of your screen, there should be a Q&A box. If you click on that, you can submit your questions. And we're going to take one more question from each, Mark and Ndidi, then we'll open up for the last quarter or so of the program to your questions that we'll share with them. But I do want to put forth a question to Mark. There's something right now, particularly as we've been watching increasing over the past month or two, particularly from one candidate, this issue of voter irregularity or potential voter irregularity. And other ways to express it is the issue, depending on what side of the coin I guess you're on, of the line, is voter suppression. So I wanted to put this forth to you. What is voter suppression? How is that looking right now, potentially being manifested in some different states, particularly around African American Muslims or African Americans or Black and Brown people in general? And it's also important, as I said earlier in this program, that the issues of voter suppression, this is not something new. There is a long history of activities to deny or prevent the vote of African Americans and other Black and Brown communities. So if you could share, what are you seeing as we're getting closer to this election day? What are the concerns about voter suppression, what it is, and how's that manifesting right now?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I want to note that, because you mentioned that, from one sort of side of the aisle, you've got these claims of voter fraud. I want to encourage folks who are watching to be a part of not legitimating those types of claims, because we know that the data is clear that voter fraud is a practically non-existent thing. It certainly is not existent in the communities that are being claimed as prone to fraudulent action. And in fact, when you see attacks on ballots this cycle, what you've seen are GOP operatives putting out fake collection boxes in places like California. You see other acts. So again, not to get partisan, but I think we need to shut down this idea that voter fraud is actually a thing. Unfortunately, on the policy side, we have largely lost, and not just on the policy side, but we've lost in the courts when it comes to voter ID laws. So let me get into the question in particular. So, I mean, voter suppression, Black people in this country, have always been central to the question of how power is allocated in one way or another, right? From the very beginning, from the fact that the 3/5 clause in the US Constitution was created so that slave states could count some portion of their enslaved humans to have more power in Congress, right? Even though those humans had no civil or human rights, they weren't offered, full humanity. They were offered definition as 3/5 of a person, so that these otherwise, smaller states would have more power. When we talk about the Voting Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act is a little bit over 50, going on 55 years old now, and it put in, of course, a number of measures to protect the Black vote. One of the most important, arguably, was pre-clearance, right? This is Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act. So this is the section that was repealed by the Supreme Court in 2013 in the case Shelby versus Holder. So our first Black AG did try to hold us down when it comes to pre-clearance, and in a stacked court defeated. And so, what this means is that we've seen across the South a number of states radically reduce the number of polling stations. This is the sort of thing that prior to 2013 would have had to be cleared by the Department of Justice, and would in no way have been cleared by the Department of Justice, because it's clearly meant to reduce voting opportunities, particularly for Black people. And so, and then of course, we came to the voter ID laws, which, again, began being implemented, were turned back in some rare cases. In North Carolina, actually, I'm thinking of redistricting, where they said that the districts were drawn almost surgically to disenfranchise Black voters. But voter ID laws have largely become the norm across the country, despite the fact that prior to their institution, there was no voter fraud. So this is a shame. And of course, what happens is, the movements go on, and another emergency comes up or another priority, and we sort of accept the new normal. And then you have these organizations pop up to help people get their IDs and so forth. And we all sort of lose sight of the fact that just 10 years ago, this was practically non-existent, this requirement to show up to the polls with these IDs. And we don't pay attention to the fact, or we don't remind ourselves enough, that in places like Texas, where this was implemented, it was implemented in a way where your gun license could count as your voter ID, but your student license, which was a photo license, could not count as your vote for voter, right? So you see the discrepancy, and hopefully you see the intention behind something like that. Now, when we talk about 2020, we also have to, of course, talk about not just voter suppression through different legal maneuvers, but we have to talk about disinformation campaigns. And we have to talk about the fact that disinformation campaigns are being targeted specifically at Black voters, right? Specifically at Black voters. And so, some examples of this are the fact that there are, and this is proven, a proliferation of fake accounts that engage, that look to be engaging authentically and with natural language and colloquial language in these online conversations that are absolutely fake. And these accounts are active in these conversations. They run ads. How many of us saw ads for an entity called Blacktivist last cycle? I mean, Blacktivist is this fake account that had ties in the Russian government, the IRA in Russia. It was like, and they were running a lot of ads on Facebook, using Facebook's targeting mechanisms for ads to target specifically Black people with Black cultural interests, and in Black geographies, right? And so what'll happen is you'll see, a conversation arise, like what we've seen with the ADOS, I won't call it a movement, but the ADOS contingency, that people argue that reparations should only be reserved for people who are American descendants of slavery. And like, for me, I don't buy it, but I also think that there is broad room for public debate, and for Black intellectual debate. However, what we've seen is that and God bless him. I know a brother who's in the Detroit chapter. I love him. I hate that he's in it, but it is what it is. But the Detroit, the Philly, these are actually, they're fairly small chapters. but online they look huge because there's just a preponderance of fake accounts amplifying their message, and they're not amplifying necessarily the reparations message. What they're amplifying is this idea that Black folks should only vote down ballot, that we should skip voting for the presidential line, and that we should vote every other line, right? And so this minority idea that emerges among some intellectuals or activists or what have you, that might get some currency in actual conversation, gets blown out of proportion by these foreign digital actors, right? And so we really have to be cognizant, because there are brilliant Black people who are proving and putting all of this on display, right? People like Shireen Mitchell. So this stuff is out there now. Another one, and I'll start to close this one. When we talk about Detroit, Detroit was a victim earlier this year of a round of robocalls going around that said to people that if you vote by mail, that basically, like, if you have any outstanding warrants, that they'll be followed up on if you vote by mail. So this was a robocall, targeting Detroiters, right? And there was actually recently an indictment of a white guy named Jacob Wall, Republican, activist, if you will, a GOP operative. And it's funny how some of these people, they actually surface like every cycle. Like, we know you're a clown, but for some reason you're still around. So thankfully there was an indictment, but again, we can't pretend like these aren't real threats, that type of stuff will work and that it'll scare some people. And the reality is that in Detroit in 2016, in Michigan, where Donald Trump won by 10,000 votes, 10,300 votes or so, Detroiters only voted at about 35%, right? A city of 680,000 people had about 250,000 voters roughly. And so I don't like to, quote unquote, blame Detroit, or Detroit voters for losing the state. Frankly, I think should blame the Macomb County voters, the suburban voters who won it for the other. However, as Black people fighting for our own interest and knowing what's good for us and what type of block grants are going to come down to us and what type of, community development, initiatives are going to come into our communities with a favorable administration, it's in our interest to turn the tide on that. And to obviously vote at higher than 35%. So I'll go ahead. I'll close there.
No, thank you, Brother Mark. It is important that we need to continue to be vigilant and fighting and protecting our right to vote, engaging, and also being smart. Everything on the internet is not true. How many times my mom has to send me an email? I just saw this on Facebook. I'm like, Mom, if it's on Facebook, get off Facebook. But yeah, I want to move on. So the point is, either we're being suppressed from voting or attempts to suppress voting by certain actors, or then unfortunately, sometimes, as I mentioned earlier, campaigns historically, when they do engage the Muslim American community, at least again, from my perspective over the past 20 years, quite often the African American Muslim experience is not at the core of that engagement, of understanding the needs of the community. So I'm happy to know, and I want Sister Ndidi to take this next question to speak about how, at least with this campaign, at least at a federal level or at the national level with the presidential campaign, how has there been some change in that or improvement with African American Muslim stakeholders engaging the presidential campaign, and in particular, with the Biden campaign? I just share with us, what does that look like, and what's been happening, and how are Muslim issues being represented or promoted?
Yes. So, the African American Muslim community has a very long and storied history of engagement, of civic engagement and political engagement. And that is why we have some of the largest numbers of Muslims in public office. And so it's not, that I'm sure that's not lost on anyone. In terms of work that's being done that's currently engaging the Muslim African American community with the current election cycle, there are a couple of organizations that are doing a lot of work. One of them, American Coalition for Good Government. I know that Judge David Shahid out of Indianapolis, he helms the Midwestern branch, which is the one that I'm affiliated with. He's been working on some very interesting strategies with supporting seniors and connecting youth. And so he's been working with youth and organizing and mobilizing youth to kind of help support seniors and their needs so that they can get access to the polls, or to help them and assist them with what they need in terms of just, voting and registering things online, and, getting involved in that aspect. Another organization which I'm affiliated with has been doing a lot of work, which is Black American Muslim Votes, which is BAM Vote. BAM, we've been focusing on low propensity voters, African-American community members, and Muslims and African-American Muslims ages 25 to 65, or African-Americans and African-American Muslims ages 25 to 65. We've been working on or focusing on reentry population. And our secondary goals have been to increase voter registration by 10%, to increase vote by mail signups, as well as obviously just overall turnout and getting out the vote, as well as voter and civic education. I think Jihad and I, we both had a conversation in regards to how, just how not literate we as an American society tend to be in regards to our civic rights, right? And just even understanding that these elections are not just about electing a president. There's so many other items on the ballot that we need to focus on, and we could talk about that later. But so that it's really important that we increase literacy and education in regards to the election process. And so that these are the things that we've been working with BAM Vote. We've also been connecting with the battleground states. We've had direct work and outreach in Pennsylvania, Virginia, of course, Michigan, North Carolina, Ohio, as well as we have, BAM has, connected with, we've connected, and we were able to secure some, to present at the Democratic National Convention. So that was, we have some really amazing team folks, including Jihad and Hamid Sahir, Imam Talib Sharif, Imam Jahar Abdul Malik, who are all kind of like working really hard in this effort. And we were able to have a very, I think, impactful or impacting presentation at the Democratic National Convention, just kind of really holding the Muslim community honest and true to the universality of Islam, as in particularly in America, which includes Black, brown, and various shades in between in that community. And then we've also been working directly with the Biden campaign, the Biden-Harris campaign. We have members who have been advising directly with the African-American director of the Biden-Harris campaign, as well as the faith director and African-American faith director of the Biden-Harris campaign. We've also been having bi-weekly webinars with various Muslim American leaders, Muslim American politicians, Muslim American faith leaders and imams, and where we have been discussing the Black Muslim American agenda, what our concerns are, what our issues are, and engaging the Biden campaign and expressing our issues and getting feedback and input in terms of how the campaign intends to meet these concerns. So I hope that's kind of helpful.
No, thank you for sharing that. And that's refreshing to hear. And again, as the Islamic Leaf, we're not here to endorse either or campaign. I would hope to believe, again, representing Islamic Leaf as a nonpartisan, that there should be engagement on all political parties, whether they be the Green Party, the Republican Party, Independent Party, engaging the Muslim American community, and in particularly the African American Muslim community. I mean, I for this program, I had to try to did a cursory research to see if there was a African American Muslims or Black Muslims for Trump, to see if there was, to bring on. couldn't find anyone. If there's anyone out there in internet land, if you can find, please share. I'm happy to give time for that side of the angle to hear about how there's engagement. But it's good to hear that there has been now some more of a nuanced engagement with the Muslim American community, particularly focused on African American Muslim engagement.
Yeah, one thing I think is important for Muslims and Black Muslims, I think, with African American people as a whole, we've become very party oriented and party centric, and really we need to be more policy focused, right? It's not just about giving our vote to a particular party, as opposed to holding these people accountable, these political parties accountable to what they will, do for us.
No, that's a good point. The developing of Black Muslim political representation, regardless of how do you exert power, and that's always good at a community organizing level. You do it at the city and the state level, but how is that enacted from the Black Muslim community? Because I do want to say, and I think Ndidi did promote it, that there is a rich tradition of African American Muslim political engagement, particularly at the city and state community levels. And now how's that translated to the national level? So we're getting now into our, we have a couple more questions we could do, but I want to get now into some Q&A. If we have questions available for these next 10 minutes or so, before we go out some closing statements, or can finish out with a couple of one or two more meaningful questions. Taking a look again, you can submit your questions on the Q&A function. I see that in our back room here, we have our brother Tariq Jones, who had a question. I know that he wanted to pose. Tariq, if you want to come on and share your question for Brother Mark or Sister Ndidi.
Assalamu alaikum. So we sort of fleshed this out before, but I think it would be good for everybody to really just get a good picture of what's been done to at this point for younger voters who are still on the fence about faith in voting, and what's I guess the last ditch effort to get them to the polls, and what are the methods and the rationale that we're giving them.
No, thanks, Tark, for that. And actually, I'm going to add on to that, to those questions, because I think it's germane, relevant. Because another question I did have for Brother Mark in your response to that also is, if there is, whether it's youth or whatever, if there is someone who just today finally convinced themselves for whatever reason, said, yes, I am going to vote, with less than 2 weeks to go, what are some resources out there for someone to determine if they are even registered, or how would they register at this late date, or what are even options for? I've heard of same day voter registration and so forth in certain states. What are some type of resources that maybe resources online that someone can use to, even if they're like, oh yeah, okay, I'm convinced, my grandmama called me and said go vote, I'm going to do it, but they're not even sure about their status.
Yeah, I mean, so one thing is everybody should have like a little bit of like FOMO, right? Like everybody, like already 40 million people have voted. So if you haven't voted yet, you about to miss out. No, so, but seriously, I mean, this is, I mean, obviously these are historic numbers, and obviously states differ, but across the country, a lot of states have moved to in-person, same-day registration all the way up until election day. And even beyond that, you could in most states, you could vote provisionally even before that. So it is never too late to vote, basically, in most scenarios. Vote.org is a good place to start in terms of checking your registration and the rules for your state. But in a lot of cases, and this is, blame it on the state secretary of state's offices more than anything else. A lot of times it's hard to centralize that data. And so you should really go to the secretary of state office or the local election clerk for your city or your state to get the most specific and up-to-date information on your voting opportunities. Beyond that, I would recommend that folks check out votesaveamerica.com/plan. Again, that's votesaveamerica.com/plan. And what this will allow you to do is actually to create a sample of your ballot. And so you can start by entering your address. and then it'll walk you through creating your ballot from the top down, giving you background information on all of your options, including your executive and legislative elected offices, your your ballot initiatives, judgeships, etc. So you can literally like spend 10 minutes going through this process at home, and walk into your booth with this thing printed out, where you've basically made all of your decisions and you just need to copy them over to your real ballot. So highly recommend votesaveamerica.com/plan. And again, visiting your local Secretary of State or clerk's website for your most up-to-date options. But the bottom line is, practically nobody is out of time if they haven't voted yet and still want to vote.
And the little bit I've done external to Islamic Relief in my private time on elections in this campaign, I've seen that there has been even to Tark's point, a strong focus on voter mobilization amongst youth, and also women, particularly suburban women, but particularly youth, disaffected youth. And I'm just wondering again, and Dee, and even to Mark again, how have you seen, at least again, the African American Muslim community is diverse, and how are you feeling just in your own master's degree that we're engaged in networks? What are you feeling or hearing about? Is there an enthusiasm deficit going on here to vote, or the vote for the lesser of two evils? All these different ways we have to try to rationalize to get people to vote. If there is enthusiasm deficit, what have been at least some successful strategies or messaging that you think that's helped to get voters out?
Yeah, I think that is important for those who are trying to galvanize, organize, and mobilize youth and the Muslim community is to just, first of all, just understand that between COVID, the losses, the police brutality, and the politics, and the jockeying back and forth and everything, there is like some heavy, there's some unenthusiasm, if that's a word, right? People are not particularly enthused in the political process in general, right? I'm somebody who worked on the Bernie campaign. There are people who were on the Bernie campaign who felt disaffected and they didn't want to vote for Hillary. And there are people who wanted to vote for Hillary who are not going to vote for whomever. And so I think first and foremost is just kind of acknowledging what the landscape is, and understanding that there may be people who feel just uninspired in general by everything that's going on, or maybe even helpless, or even just maybe apathetic. But the reality is our people have survived so much already. We really have. And everything that we are dealing with and suffering with right now is not even, whatever the opposite of exponential is, right? It's not even a percentage of that which those before us have experienced. Literally, our ancestors led their way out of slavery, right? And many of us, through God's grace, were able to be brought back to our religion of origin, right? So our ancestors led ourselves out of slavery, out of Jim Crow, through the Civil Rights Movement. They've seen worse than what we've experienced, and it's not to lessen our experience, but we can do this. We can, irrespective of how things turn out, irrespective of who gets inaugurated in January, we got this. By God's grace, we got this. But we are, as Muslims, we know that it's faith and action. So we cannot afford to be apathetic. We cannot afford to just let it go. Literally, a choice not to vote is literally a choice to vote for whichever candidate it is that you don't agree with. So you have to figure out what it is that you believe in and support and want to see progressed, and make that vote accordingly. Personally, I know that with the current assault on Black lives, with the pandemic and things like that, for me, it's very, me choosing not to vote, I feel like it's like casting a vote towards Black death. That may be different for different people. Everyone has different perspectives, and I'm not trying to push anything on anyone, but I know that we have Fannie Lou Hamer, Shirley Chisholm, so many people who did so much work for our right to be able to affect change. Let's go ahead and get our souls to the polls, and our young people needs to be leading the way.
No, You heard it there. You heard it from Auntie Ndidi right there.
I
This
am
is
in my
definitely
30s. I
it's
am
been
not,
it is.
I'm only the auntie to twin 5-year-olds. Okay. Just, all right.
But yeah,
You can
you
hear
heard
sister.
it. It is an important vote, and I'm seeing that at this point, with less than 2 weeks, if people aren't already convinced, they're not going to be convinced by any campaign ads or social media ads to go vote. And again, it just as a social good, as an organization that's Islamically promotes, it is a good for people to participate civically and to vote. You out there listening, or listeners, it is you. It's going to be you in personal relationships, making phone calls to your cousins, to your kids, to your aunts and uncles, or to your nieces and nephews, and saying the same way that Sister Ndidi just really gave a really good imploring why it's important to vote, telling them, you may not want to vote, but I need you to vote. Those personal relationships, picking out 5 people. I think that is kind of like that voter plan we're all hearing about right now these last few weeks. How are you planning out to go vote, but also taking other people with you? Souls to the poll. We got to come up with a Muslim version of Souls to the
Facebook
poll.
text message. You don't need anybody to appoint you to go to do voter outreach. You can literally just text message everyone who you think, who comes to mind. You can call, phone bang, all of these things. We don't need anyone. Like I said, we've been leading for a long time. You don't need permission. You can just step into that. And if everyone took that upon themselves, that would help tremendously.
Yeah, I'll just echo that. We definitely have found that friend to friend outreach is the thing this election cycle, especially with door to door canvassing, really restricted because of COVID, and so you see a lot of people encouraging folks to just identify 3 friends that you will confirm are going to vote, and and I just want to share one more quote. It's actually from one of Ndidi's sorors, but the sister said, because a lot of times we get caught up in like this passive language, right? And so this is from Stephanie Brown James, and she runs actually a PAC called the Collective PAC for supporting Black candidates. She said, let's be clear. Black folks didn't just die for the right to vote. They were killed by the grandparents of the folks that still don't want Black folks to vote today because they know our vote is valuable, right? So just to name the action, we didn't just spontaneously die trying to vote. There are people invested to the point of killing us that understand the power that we have by voting. So,
word. Well, now what happens on November 3rd or immediately afterwards? I'm assuming that we're not going to have a clear discernment of victory. So it could be days and potentially weeks on with this election. But thinking about that, another question that we received, we'll take this as the last question. What can we do to support a continued fair and equal process post-election? How you interpret that? I think again, what should how do we as Muslim Americans, as citizens, what can we do to? I'm not sure if it means to process or go ahead.
I want to answer that, but I think there was also, I noticed that one person had a question about the opportunity zones, and so I just wanted to just answer that very quickly. Why are they ineffective? And so basically, like after just 2.5 years, with the data is pretty much made clear is that what the opportunity zones do is they allow wealthy folks to basically move funds out of their investment portfolio, contingent on, without any capital gains tax, contingent on them immediately putting those funds into investments in certain geographies. However, what we've seen is that what that means is that, these are investments. These are not into philanthropic efforts into certain geographies. And so a lot of that money has gone into high-end hotels. It's gone into what I'm sure you've seen, the proliferation of storage companies that are popping up everywhere. You see beautiful buildings that are just hollowed out storage companies, right? Because these qualify enough, as long as they're placed in certain geographies, for people to be able to shield their monies from taxes by investing. And so this is the case with opportunity zones across the board. They are not making it into the communities that need the greatest investments. So to the last point, just about a fair and equal process, I'm just going to encourage folks to. You got websites for days. I'm going to encourage everybody to check out Protect the Results. It's protecttheresults.com. And so, you know, we've seen quite clearly one candidate, an incumbent candidate, say that they are not committing to a peaceful transition of power. Never before have you heard that from a sitting president in the United States, but here we are. And so this idea that we need to protect the results, I encourage folks to check out that site to sign up in case there are emergency events. In the case of a highly contested election, or just to learn more about the possibilities of that, and that's widely endorsed by a number of organizations. Again, I don't mean to be partisan by any means, but like if there is a contested election, it will be won through activism in one way or another. It'll be won through legal activism. It'll be won through judicial activism, or it'll be won through organizing and us becoming activists. So let's just put that out there.
Indeed.
The question again was, because he went to the opportunity zones and I got a little lost. Remind me.
What can we do to support a continued fair and equal process post-election?
Oh, yeah, interesting. To support an equal, I mean, what Mark said, I'm with that. I think that I just think that we just need to the work. I think it would help anxiety if people would kind of take a little bit of the tension off of putting everything into November, right? And realize that first and foremost, it's going to be whatever it's going to be. And it's beyond, like, we can affect as much as we can affect, and then the rest is in the creator's hands. And so I think that one of the things that 2016, I think, was a big teaching point, right? Because it showed us a large group of activists and grassroots organizers and people. We thought there was just no way, like, America is going to make this move and not that move, because there really wasn't a choice. And then the rest of America showed us, well, like, actually, we got options, right? And it showed us that there is a whole demographic of the American community that has a mindset that we thought we were maybe past. Some people thought we were past it. Some people thought we were past it, but it woke everybody up. And it forced everyone to start working together across the aisle on some levels, and within our communities and across communities, right? Across various demographics, right? So the work, even though, depending upon your particular political party, you may have felt that, your hopes were dashed or whatever the case is, there are always teachable moments and learning lessons that you can utilize to do better next time. And there are a lot of different experts, industry experts and professionals who always say that you learn better from your mistakes and the things and your losses, so you know what to do better. It forced us to have to come together and work with each other. And I think that irrespective of how things turn out in January, we're going to need to keep that same energy. I don't encourage anybody just trying to get really engaged right now to get a particular outcome. This is work that needs to be done across the board. Keep this same energy in December, January, all the way through 2022, all the way back to the next cycle, honestly. And there may be some prolonged issues with the voting and the ballot and things like that. I think realistically, either way this turns out, there may be some fallout. Either way the election turns out, we have to be very honest. We have to be awake and alert and make sure that our communities are awake and alert, and making sure that we are being as safe as possible, and keeping our community members safe as possible. But the work continues. A luta continua.
Yes, I look to continue. Well, I want to thank both of you for taking time this afternoon to be with us, with our audience, to share your personal insights on this election, what's at stake, what are some of the challenges, what are some of the key issues of the African-American Muslim community and experience, and some sharing, particularly marking a lot of the resources and tools that we put into the chat box, votesaveamerica.com/plan. And I wasn't even familiar with the protecttheresults.com. I want to I'm looking more into that one. So thank you for sharing those results. It's been really beneficial. I do want for us to go out because, to be honest, it's been a long election season, very taxing emotionally for a lot of us who are in our private times or our work or involved with campaigning and so forth. And sometimes as we watch the nightly news, it's not always very positive. So I would love for each of you to, as your closing statements for about 30 seconds, as we go out, regardless of the outcome, as you were just saying, Sister Ndidi, regardless of that outcome, up and down the ballot, what are you most optimistic about after November 3rd? What's most inspired you over the work you've been doing with this campaign, looking at the community, engaging community, that you hope will continue after the election into the future with political engagement? Just 30 seconds to a minute on that, and we'll let Mark finish out with that also.
The unmitigated sheer dynamicism of the African-American spirit, the African-American Muslim spirit. And so we're gonna push through and we're gonna overcome, because that's what we do by God's grace, and we're gonna continue on. And so I'm hopeful that God has us, irrespective of how this turns out, and then we're gonna continue to do what we've always done. And those of us who want to work with us, I mean, I think you should get on the good ticket. So those are my thoughts. And I want to thank you.
What was the website again for your organization or what you're working with?
Oh, BAM Vote. BAMvote.com. BAM-vote.com. BAM, BAM-vote.com. Get involved, get connected. We're on Instagram, Facebook, various social media platforms. We actually have an event coming up on Friday, so you can get more information on that website. If you want to reach out to me, I'm Ndidi Writes. My handle is Ndidi Writes. I have a post for Fannie Lou Hamer, since Mark wants to throw out quotes from my sorors. There's a really nice recording from Fannie Lou Hamer. I would love people to hear about how they set sick dogs on her, but she went to those voting booths anyway. So there's no excuse to get out to the polls. So I thank you all for putting this together, because it was needed. And so shout out to Jihad Abdullah and Tarek.
Thank you, Ndidi. Brother Mark, what inspires you? What do you hope to continue on even post November 3rd?
Yeah, alhamdulillah, let me first just say I agree. This has been a great conversation. At least I've enjoyed it. I shouldn't not grade it, but I've enjoyed it, and grateful to spend the time talking with my sister Ndidi and to brother Jihad, and grateful for what y'all are doing with BAM Vote, and the effort that's gone into spinning that up and ensuring our seat at the table, so to speak. In terms of what's inspired me over this long and taxing season, I don't have an honest answer to that. I mean, the numbers, the early vote numbers are incredible, and those are inspiring from the sense of we want this democracy thing to work. As I get older, I believing in this democracy thing a little bit more. No, but I think so that the turnout is self-inspiring. But beyond that, just being real with you again, the way I look at life, this election is just part of it. Life is one movement toward Allah, right? Like that's what this is. And so November 2nd, November 4th, if I wake up, with Allah's permission, I'm just gonna be happy to be alive, be raising my kids, I'm gonna be doing my little community work, walking down the streets of my masjid, and living life. A lot of times, you hear activists talk about this idea that electing the president, particularly the president, but elections in general, are not necessarily about, I think that you need them to cement social change. They certainly aren't often the start of social change by any means, but they are about creating the terrain on which we are going to fight. And to the extent that, that there's still going to be, 3 vacant houses on my block in November, in the middle of November, regardless of who wins this election, right? Like, to the extent that, direct funds into urban communities are still coming as block grants instead of real federal investments, no matter what type of administration we have, right? There's still going to be fighting to do, for justice, for housing justice, for racial justice, et cetera. So, I'm going to go out and vote. I encourage everyone to do the same. I'm very clear-eyed about our choices. I'm very clear-eyed about, the possibilities and that exist or are limited in the presidency. And I'm very clear that after I vote, we're going to keep on doing this community development work. So to that regard, I encourage folks to check us out at dreamofdetroit.org if you want to learn more about what we're trying to do here in the city. As Brother Jihad mentioned, we've rehabbed actually about 13 homes so far, including just recently bringing online our first transitional home for previously incarcerated men. And we combine housing and economic development and community organizing because we think all three of those elements are what's needed for the Muslims in this area to lead in bringing back a neighborhood like ours. So again, we're grateful and thank you for having us in this conversation.
Well, thank you, Brother Mark. Thank you, and Sister Ndidi. I'm inspired that we are able to have great leaders like you, activists, organizers, to bring on to a show like this. And again, I implore to grow that, whether it be South Asian, Persian, Turkish, African-American, Muslims, diverse, get involved in the political process. Campaigning is great opportunities to learn and engage new people. In my private time, I'd be the first person to help someone to go register to be a Republican. And if that's what they're interested in, I just want people to be engaged. And that's what Islam keeps calling forth, is that our supporters to make sure that your voice be heard, utilize your right to be heard through the voice, through the election. And ultimately, like I said, your selection, your vote is going to end up impacting the work that I do for the next 2 to 4 years, whether it's midterm elections and so forth, engaging public officials. We will continue to represent, to the best of our ability, the humanitarian, anti-poverty issues of the Muslim American community, regardless who's present, regardless who's representing you in your congressional office or your Senate. That's what we're here to do. And thank you so much for our partners across the country for the work that you're doing in responding to COVID, helping to save lives, helping to improve lives, and also building bridges between communities in the process. Please stay tuned. We will have another iteration of this structural racism webinar series in the next month or two. You'll get the emails from our good brothers Abdullah and so forth in our U.S. programs team. And again, I want to thank them for a lot of the legwork to get this program together. So everyone, we wish you all the best. Be well, be safe, and vote. Assalamu alaikum.